Hello, Internet. It's been a while since we talked about China last time. Despite of all breakthroughs of technological era, it is still a terra incognita, an unknown land to many of us, particularly when we try to analyze the Chinese socialist project, the Chinese Revolution, and its heritage. In that regard, every opportunity to talk to an insider is indeed very valuable. Today, we are joined by a renowned Marxist from China, Fred Angst, who is teaching at Beijing's University of International Business and Economics. Hello, Fred. It is an honor to have you. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, but I'm not a renowned Marxist. I'm just a plain old man.
This is how you were introduced to me by our Chinese friends who represent the younger generation of Chinese Marxists. So I think we would stick with that definition if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's freedom expression. You can say anything you want.
Thank you. First of all, may I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your family? The story, in my opinion, is so unique that it has to be told before we move on. You were born in China, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, my parents came to China right after World War II. The reason actually has to do with World War II. My father was originally an upstate New York dairy farmer, and he happened to go into Cornell University, and he had a roommate, Bill Hinton, which is my uncle. And through that relationship, my father got to know my mother. But my mother was actually a nuclear physicist, member of the Manhattan Project, and she was not into romance. And even though my father has a crush on her, and she was all into science. And my aunt was a member of a CPUSA in those days, and she introduced my uncle, my father, my mother, all the progressive literatures, Communist Manifesto, Red Star Over China by Edgar Snow, and many, many other type of progressive things. And but my father didn't come to China during the war, and he didn't even finish the Cornell. He just took all the classes he thought is useful and quit schooling and start farming. After a few years of farming, he felt, in the 44, and the war is getting really intense, and he thought, wow, being a dairy farmer, 365 days, you don't have a day of a break. You can't see the world and be a farmer at the same time, especially a dairy farmer. And so he decided he's going to quit farming and go to China to join the army. He wanted to join the army to fight fascists. And the day he sold the cow, August 45, and the war ended. And so he was not happy with that. In terms of missing the chance to join the army to fight fascists. And he went to Washington, D.C. and signed up for the United Nations Relief Program, came to China. My mother was not interested in coming to China at those days. And she was devastated by what the U.S. did in Japan, because all the nuclear physicists under the impression that the nuclear bomb, it will be used as a deterrent rather than using our real people. So once the U.S. dropped bombs in Japan, and they formed a Los Alamos nuclear scientist. I forgot the full name. Association of Los Alamos scientists. They lobby for civilian control of nuclear energy, and then it was successful, and Truman signed into law, and she thought everything was fine. So she went back to school and in University of Chicago, and her professor is Fermi, of all people. Fermi and her schoolmates are both both are Nobel Prize winners, Frank Yang and Li Zhendao. I'm not sure Li Zhendao's English name is what. Anyway, and So everything's going fine until second year. She find out her scholarship came from the Navy, and that was devastating for her. She realized that unlike Frank Yang, who does the theoretical physics, whatever my mother do in experimental physics will help the U.S. build a bigger, stronger bomb. So she has to leave. And so what to do? And so when my father came to China, he keep on writing letters to my mother. So you better come to China. China's going through a big upheaval. And if you don't come now, you're going to miss the boat. So in those days, my uncle was in China also. And so my mother decided to leave the U.S. and see the U.S. from outside and decide to come to China, take a look. And so that was 1948. And then they got married in Yan'an, of all places. This is a long story. And then they stayed on and participated in the Chinese Revolution. They found very fascinating. I describe it as like you're watching a television series that's so exciting, and you watch one episode, you can't stop watching another one, just keep on watching one after another. And so they're not only watching.
It was 1949, right?
Yeah, well, the Chinese Revolution victory in 1949, and then they stayed on in Yan'an area, and then went to Xi'an. And I was born in Beijing in 52, and then was raised in the ancient capital Xi'an. So they stayed there until they passed away all their life. So I was born in Beijing, but 40 days later, my mother took me back to Xi'an. So I was raised on a state farm till 1966, when the Cultural Revolution began. Our family moved to Beijing, and so I was part of the Red Guard movement and traveling, going around the country, and had a lot of fun, a lot of fun. And then 69, I was supposed to graduate from middle school. Actually, I only had 1 year of middle school, and that Cultural Revolution began. So a whole year of non-studying. So the 7th grade, I was in middle school. 8th grade is all Cultural Revolution, and 9th grade, I was we start schooling, but not much new, and then I was supposed to graduate from 9th grade, and I was assigned a job to work in the woodworking factory in Beijing. I was there for 5 years, and of course, in 71, the relationship between China and U.S. Thawed, and the relation became more normal. My uncle Bill Hinton came to China, and a lot of relatives came to China, and I got so fascinated and about the U.S. And I grew up in China. People always say I'm American, but I have no idea what the U.S. is like. So with the intense curiosity, I left China in 74 and stayed there for about 30 years. Of course, I come back often. To see my parents. Homesick, terrible homesick. Then I finally came back to China in 2007 and been teaching in there ever since.
One thing I wanted to ask you about your mom's story, because it is so fascinating. It is almost completely unknown to the Russian audience. So you mentioned she decided to move to China after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, right?
Right.
Have you talked about that? Have you with her? Have you discussed it? And she was a part of the Oppenheimer project. The world is talking about the Hollywood movie, which was released recently. I don't know if you watched it. So,
yeah, I did.
I'm curious. What's your opinion? Was that atmosphere portrayed adequately in the movie? And what did your mom tell you about this this era, her thoughts and feelings, and how the nuclear bombing influenced her generation and her fellow colleagues?
Oh yeah. Well, before the U.S. dropped the bomb, people were really excited participating in this project because the World War was going on, and they were really afraid that the German would be the first to acquire a nuclear bomb, and so they worked night and day diligently. And my mother, being a probably the youngest or the least experienced nuclear physicist of the team, because she went to college in Bennington, Vermont, and majored in physics and violin. And finally, the physics teacher in Bennington says, I told you everything. You want to learn more, you got to go to graduate school. So she went apply for Cornell, and they didn't want women, and she applied to the University of Illinois, and I think it's Madison. And so she find out, she really loves physics, and that was her passion. And then soon after she arrived there, she found out her classmates, her teachers, their equipments, one after another disappeared. And as soon as she got a letter inviting her to go to this mountainous place in Santa Fe. And people invite her are the people who work with her in Cornell in the summer camp, working on the cloud chamber. And so she agreed, and the school gave her a master's degree based on the cloud chamber she did in college days. So those days, you can get a degree pretty easily. So she is not a very top-notch in any way. And only after the war, when she went back to Chicago, University of Chicago, to study with the Fermi, she had to catch up so many like math and all kinds of quantum physics and everything. And what she can remember, I went with her to Santa Fe in '77. We visited the old site that she worked with and all her old colleagues. And also we visit all different universities around the U.S. A lot of these are head of the university, physics lab or physics department are her old classmates. And that was really a great experience. But the reason that she finally decided she cannot continue, she had to leave, is because she found out she's a pacifist in those days. And her passion for physics is not as important, her passion for humanity. And so she said, you guys can keep on studying physics, but I have to leave. And so it was a very difficult decision, but she never regretted it. And she wrote quite a lot about that experience. And before they dropped the bomb, they worked really together. It's like it's a communal spirit, and scientists are all open, sharing, and but then once you go to university, become all intellectual property, and everybody worry about their PhD thesis and publishing, and no longer that cooperation, the spirit of cooperation. And whereas he went to China and find out that spirit of cooperation is really very attractive. When I was born, and she happened to meet a group of Japanese delegation in Beijing during the peace conference in '52, and she talked about her experience, and then people said, "Wow, that's a really fascinating thing. You got to talk this to the whole conference." So she made a speech in the conference, and then the U.S. found out, well, that's where Joan Hinton went. And so all kinds of rumors around the U.S. And there's a magazine, it's called a Truth magazine or whatever it's called. It says, describe my mother as a atom spy who got away. And in the article, there's such a great imagination. And they say my mother left the Inner Mongolia nuclear experimental base and took a Mao's private jet plane, flew to Beijing to participate in that meeting. But the truth is, my mother got pregnant, and then about 7 month pregnancy, she decided it's safer to have birth in Beijing rather than in North Shanxi. So it took her a week, took a donkey car from where she was in Inner Mongolia, and then to arrive to Yan'an, and it took a truck another few days to a coal mining town, and took a coal mining truck, a train to Xi'an, and took a passenger train. Took her 2 weeks to arrive to Beijing. So all these accusations are really crazy. But the consequence is, in the 50s and 60s, if she chooses to go back to the U.S., she will be prosecuted. Like the Rosenbergs that got executed. And my mother knows a lot more than Rosenbergs. So she didn't feel safe to go back to the U.S. And then when the U.S.-China relationship got thawed and normalized, she didn't think safe to go right away. So my father went back to U.S. in 75 for a visit. And then based on all the talk, everything, it's safe for my mother to go back. So my mother went to U.S. to visit in 77. And basically, they know my mother has nothing to do with the physics other than making farm equipment. She spent all her days in Xi'an, in Yan'an, in Beijing. It's all about farm mechanization, those kinds. She used her physics for that kind of stuff. And I mean, from all the spy network, everything that U.S. find out, she is so far away from anything to do with the nuclear physics. And so it was safe for her to go back to the U.S. in 77.
Fred, one more thing about the Manhattan Project story. Do you know if she was at the time when she decided to move over, was she a communist? Did she have communist views or beliefs? Because the movie is telling us that in the atmosphere of witch hunt, McCarthy and stuff, most of the scientists tried to distance themselves from the left-wing views. And what was her position on that? And did she acquire her world vision after she moved to China?
Well, during Manhattan Project, she was just wanted to fight fascism. And even when she came to China in 1948, she just a pacifist. And she has no, that just pure and simple pacifist, and saw the devastation of the war on people around the world. And so I think, she did not participate hardly anything that I can remember of the left-wing activities other than the lobbying for civilian control of nuclear physics, even though her sister was a member of the CPUSA, but she did not, there's no record or any talk of her active participating in any of these stuff. But I mean, she just wanted to see what the world's like. And so I think took her, by the years in China, gradually she was able to overcome the pacifism, and through study and practice and all kinds of study sessions and the live experience in China, particularly the polemic between U.S. and between the China and the USSR, the Communist Party of China and Communist Party of Russia, Soviet Union those days, and that 10-year polemic from 1956 to 1966. That is what made her become a communist. Yeah, so she was just a simple pacifist.
And how did that influence you? Were you raised as a young communist? You mentioned you were a part of the Red Guard movement. Your early years coincided with the Cultural Revolution, right? And your parents were supportive of the Cultural Revolution. So how were your views shaped, and what were the main factors?
Well, I mean, raised in China, you're bombarded with Marx, Lenin, and Maoism, and you can't avoid that. Thought I know quite a bit, and particularly in the 70s, when I was in the factory, there was a lot of inner party struggle, and there was a call for people to learn the Marxist, Leninist basics. And for example, not only Communist Manifesto, but Engels' Anti-Jewing and Lenin's State and Revolution, many other books, many other writings. But in my factory, the leadership says, you're a foreigner, you cannot, well, they didn't say that. They talk very nicely. They says, Fred, my name is Heping in Chinese. They says, this afternoon the study, you don't have to be there. I said, no problem, I can be there. No, you don't have to be there. And so they don't want me to be there. And so I was really upset, and I bought all these classics, study on my own. I was only about 19, 20, 21 years old. And I studied all these classics, and it was difficult. And especially, I even studied Das Kapital, the first volume, halfway through. It was too hard. And so when I went to US 74, I was full of confidence in my understanding of Marxism and everything. And God, little did I know, because in China I was bombarded with Marxism as a positive thing. In the US, just the opposite. And so I never was exposed enough of the anti-Marxist, anti-Leninist, or anti-Maoist theory or arguments and everything there. So I feel overwhelmed, just like I was backtracking. I just feel so confused and lost, really lost. And then China started reform, opened up, and they demonized the Cultural Revolution, demonized Mao's period. I was really devastated. Of course, the turning point, the worst, was the end of the 80s. Emotionally, cannot accept the crackdown in June 4th. And on the other hand, I cannot embrace capitalism. It's all because of Lenin. Lenin in the State and Revolution and the imperialism's high stage capitalism made it very clear. And so if you embrace capitalism, it eventually becomes imperialism. And I cannot accept imperialism. And it is fact that the US has a military base over 100 different countries. And the US has not changed its behavior anyway, still an imperialist country. And so if I do not embrace capitalism, if I don't support imperialism, I cannot embrace capitalism. There's no other way. So I was faced with a terrible dilemma, what to do, what's the output. And so in the 90s and 2000s, and I tried to make sense what happened in China. So in my attempt to understand why revolutionaries become new rulers, become new oppressors, that is the value of studying Chinese history for the last 70 some years, especially Mao's period, and why there was a cultural revolution and everything. And so with a great effort, I finally crawled back to Marxism. And 80s, 90s, I was told, especially 80s, I was totally lost, very confused. But in the 90s, you have first Gulf War, the second Gulf War. The U.S. imperialism didn't change. And in China, there are all these state-owned enterprise workers got laid off, and there's a lot of workers struggle. So the history proved Marxism, Leninism, Mao was correct. I mean, that history shows with no question in my mind. I mean, what China during Mao's period trying to avoid was real. So that's how I crawled back to Marxism, but a lot of pain, and a lot of anyway, that's how I deal with these.
May I ask you, in what language did you read Das Kapital? Was it English, Chinese? So it was a very particular, very specific angle. Could you tell us what is, in your opinion, the most important Mao's and China's in general contribution to Marxism?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing, and is in the 60s, people around the world find Maoism very attractive because not only Mao able to show in a third world country how you can overthrow imperialism, overthrow feudalism, and start building socialism, but that part doesn't have much attraction to people in Europe and Japan or US and any developed industrial countries. However, the Cultural Revolution was very attractive to the progressive around the world because it was trying to address the question of how to prevent revolutionaries become new oppressors. And that has relevance to any revolution, and how to prevent revolutionaries turning it bad. And so so that was a very, I don't know what the phrase to use, but that was just I think it's one of the longest, deepest, most broad and comprehensive movement to make people learn how to be the master of society. And ordinary people, the workers and peasants and students, people debate, argue about their enterprise, their school, their farm, what is correct role to do, the leadership, are they for socialism or are they for capitalism, and how to prevent workers killing each other during armed conflicts. And so it has a tremendous amount of material for any people who are serious about changing the world. You got to learn that experience and learn what the lessons and what the mistakes and so I think that's the greatest contribution Mao was able to make to the Marxism, because you see, Marx in Marx's day, he did not have. See, Marx is very he's very what's the word? Cautious. Anything that cannot show from a history or from logic, he does not predict. He did not say social society will look like what, communist society will look like what, only very basic principles. Very basic principles. And so you cannot build socialism based on what Marx says, because there's no experience there. That's about historical materialism. And so Lenin was able to take the principles of dialectical materialism and trying to apply that in the Russian Revolution and trying to build the first socialist country. And there was totally uncharted territory. And so there were a lot of mistakes, but you're trying to defend the working class as the ruling class in the society. And how to build that is very difficult. And so Mao learned from the experiences, the mistakes and setbacks from the Soviet Union and also Eastern Europe. And so he trying to see, okay, after 49 to 56, so 7 years, they were able to transform Chinese society from individual farming and the small private enterprises and small national capitalists into collective farming countrywide and the socialist enterprise countrywide. No longer you have small capitalists or big capitalists hire people. So you have all state planning. Everything was achieved by 1956. But what do you do next? And there are people who are upset. There are workers go on strike. Students are unhappy with the bureaucracy. Farmers are not too happy with some of the policies. And so before you are the ruling party, you can fight the status quo. But when you become the ruling party, how do you deal with the discontent among the people? And that is where Mao made the most contribution. It's just how to make sure the working class is in power and how to prevent what he coined the phrase capitalist voters in the party. So that is the reason why I came back in 2007, because I felt when I was in the US, I feel lost. I was working in auto factory, being a worker, and we have auto workers union, and so the union struggle. What's the aim of union struggle? Get a bigger share of the pie or took over the pie. The workers made the pie, but why do you have to share with the capitalists? And so the workers would say, see, you guys, you're communists. You are trying to use us and get into power, and then you would keep on oppress us. And I just feel really don't know what to say, because the reality, that's what happened to the Soviet Union. That's what happened to China. And so without knowing how to prevent revolutionaries becoming new oppressors, I am lost. So that's the reason I want to come back to China and thoroughly understand what happened since 49, but also not only what happened, but why it happened. Find out what I call is the law of class struggle. Law of class is something that's objective. It's not something you can just do some kind of design. You have system in place that doesn't work, because just like you playing basketball, you're playing football or anything, you have your strategy, I have my strategy. And so every class trying to summarize its experience and trying to find a better way to fight back against the other class. So that's why I came back, and last 15 years has been very, very fruitful for me.
I have many more questions popping up, but before I forget it, so you see the Cultural Revolution as a tool or for preserving the primacy of proletariat in a proletarian state, right?
Right.
We in the USSR, people in the USSR, Marxists, theoreticians, were very skeptical of the Cultural Revolution phenomenon, and it was criticized as as an outburst of unmotivated terror against the academia, against the educated circles, layers of society. What could you say to those critics?
Well, imagine in a university, you have students and teachers form different organizations arguing about how do you do education reform, what kind of education shall we have, and whether the things you learn is capitalist or socialist, and you have different opinions. And at the beginning, They are in China those days. They use what's called a big character posters, right? Big piece of sheet that's really 1 meters long and 80 centimeters wide or something, and then use the brush, just write characters, and so post it on the wall near the dormitories, on the cafeteria, or on the street and anywhere, and they express their opinions, just like today's social media, and that's a form of social media in those days, and so people arguing back and forth, and then the argument sometimes heated up, and so different factions, and just like, I don't know how it was like in Russia today, and today's the social media, you post this and I against you, and then some people delete that. Some people have the power to delete their comments, and so we have a big character posters, a new one cover up the old one, and the other one says, "How dare you cover up?" So they start fist fighting, and this is among the intellectuals, among the professors, among the students. And in Tsinghua University in particular, this is the top university in China, in Beijing, and that factional fighting escalated to very violent fights. And two factions, these are both factions who are critical of the old university leadership. So they are what's called a rebels factions. But yet they split and they fight each other. And then, so first just big character poster condemning each other, and then they have loudspeakers on this building, they occupy this building, another faction occupied other building, they have loudspeaker condemning each other, and then they have escalated, they kidnap, this faction kidnapped other people, put them in the basement, other faction kidnapped this, and Tsinghua University is a science and it's not an art university, it's a science university. So students know how to make tools, and so they start building missiles, just makeshift missiles, and bombarding each other. So it just keep on escalating. So that's the thing. You give people the right to criticize and to supervise, to challenge the school authority, and how do you prevent two factions killing each other? And so the so-called persecution is basically part of the factional fights. Anybody condemns a cultural revolution, they have to face reality. If in your country, in your institutions, if people are allowed to express their opinion and form their own organizations to challenge authority, how do you prevent that into a civil war?
So it was a grassroots movement. It wasn't instigated or encouraged by the government.
Well, I'll take it a little back, because the beginning, from 66, fall of 66 to summer of 67, when the students and workers who rise up criticizing their leadership, is often in these places, the leadership mobilized these so-called conservative faction, the loyal faction, and suppressed the rebel faction. Some are quite violent. And for example, in Wuhan, city of Wuhan, the city administrators and the provisional administrators organized this huge group of loyal factions and suppressed with arms. And they have trucks and hundreds of trucks marching in the street, and they have these steel pipes and cut an end that's really sharp, and then trying to suppress rebels. So, but by the summer of '67, these leaders who instigate violence against the rebels pretty much stopped, by the center. You cannot do that. And then the rebel becomes the dominating faction in most places. Then the rebel split. They split. They start fighting for positions, fighting for turfs, and it's just really a real mess. And the place that really did well is Shanghai. Shanghai has a long history of working class tradition, and the Shanghai workers, once they find out these factional fightings are really just for the leaders trying to get a bigger share or more position in the new government, and then they lost interest. However, in other places, people are so, what's the word? For example, I don't know, in Russian like to play soccer, right? And you have your favorite soccer team, they have their favorite soccer team, and then people get so, what's the word? They embody the soccer team as their own, and then they started the soccer fans fighting each other. And then so it no longer becomes what's right and wrong. It's all about factional, just like that kind of things happen a lot. And so
wasn't Mao involved? Wasn't he a part of the struggle?
Yeah, it is. And so Mao was really skillful in mobilizing the people against the leadership of different places and supporting rebels. And the most important thing is the Red Guard movement. I mean, Red Guard movement was really it was so ingenious. I mean, it just looks so smart, and using Red Guard to go against the status quo, the old establishment. And so Mao was really very skilled in mobilizing people. But once people get mobilized, how to prevent factional fighting, killing each other, Mao find very hard to do. And that has to do with the overwhelming nature of Chinese population came from peasantry. And from peasants, peasants are used to small scale production. I'm not sure what's like in Russia or in the Soviet Union. Chinese farmers, after land reform, they farm their own plot. So the farmers have this very tendency of just doing my own, go it alone, get rich by myself. And so that mentality still permeates among the people who left farm, joined the factory, become workers. But they still have this petty bourgeois mentality. And contrast that with the people in Shanghai. You just find Shanghai has a long tradition of working class struggle. Then if you have been a working class member for a long time, you tend to be subconsciously, naturally think about what do you do, how that impact the production, impact society. And so they're not the small producer mentality, the peasants like. So you can see during the reform and open up, the slogan is let some people get rich first. And when the peasants hear that, they say, well, I can get rich first. But when the workers hear that, well, that means the leadership can get rich first. Because they don't have that individual piecework type thing. It's a socialized production. So with a socialized production, people's mentality is different than small producers.
What's the official? Sorry. What is the official stand on the Cultural Revolution and Mao's role in today's China? Is it like what I heard? 70% right?
No, not anymore.
Wrong? No,
not anymore. It's all bad. There's nothing.
All bad.
Yeah,
all bad.
Nothing positive. Yeah, not anymore. During Mao's period, Mao summarized 70% good, 30% bad. The bad part is the near civil war, and not distinguished between the contradiction among the people versus antagonistic contradiction between people and the enemy. So that's Mao's summary. But after Mao passed away, the coup overthrown the so-called Gang of Four, and yeah, well, I mean, they just slowly, one step by step, demonize the Cultural Revolution, demonize Mao's period. Today, actually, they don't talk about Cultural Revolution anymore. What they find out is that if you demonize Mao's period too much, the ruling party lost its legitimacy. And so they have to soften up the critique of the Mao's period.
But what are the generic people's thoughts about Mao? We can see photos and videos of public gatherings and demonstrations with Maoist portraits. How is he perceived? Because we have here in Russia, we have a sort of a cult related to Stalin. And in current circumstances, we don't see really anything progressive in that, because Stalin is viewed by many, particularly people of the elder generation. Stalin is seen as a reminiscence of, you know, of the Russian Tsars, of like an emperor who ruled the greater Russia to its peak and most powerful position in the world. How is it? Is it indifferent in China? How is Mao perceived by the young people and not so young people in China?
There is a change over time. In the 70s, late 70s, 80s, Mao is portrayed as just a dictator, a tyrant, and by 90s, there's some softening up, but not too much. I think the change is around 2000 or later. As China rise up, become an industrial power, more and more people see Mao as the nationalist hero. So that kind of so the government, the bureaucracy, the intellectual, more and more see Mao as a hero that got rid of imperialism in China, got rid of the feudal dynasty, semi-colonial, semi-feudal society, and so they honor him for that part. But everything after 50s, very little support by the official controlled media. Among the population, I think the favor for Mao go ups and downs. Every time people feel discontent with the current leadership, the ruling party, they go back to Mao. And so, especially when you have these state-owned enterprise workers got laid off, get fired, and they just very much want to go back to Mao's type of a society. But that's very old generations in the 90s, and they more or less died out. But today, for the last 10 years or so, I think that nationalism probably is the dominant trend. China being a rising industrial power, and you cannot dismiss Mao's contribution to that. And so people tend not to talk too much about, at least the official control media tend not to talk too much about Mao's contribution after 49th Revolution. But young people was very different. Young people, last 5 years or so, every increasing amount of young people rediscovering Marxism, rediscovering Mao, because they contrast what's like during Mao period, what's like today, and they find this today's society, the gap between rich and poor is so appalling, and state apparatus is so oppressive, and so they start thinking, wait a minute, all your criticism Mao's period doesn't make any sense. And so they rediscovering all kinds of, yeah. So I would say that is a minority, but it's increasing in its rank and more.
So you are living through the revival of interest to Marxism
Yeah.
in China. I wonder, from the theoretical point of view, what do you think? How applicable is Marxism in general to the Chinese society and to the Chinese economy? Because we remember that Marx wrote about the Asiatic mode of production, kind of separating China and its socialized way of dealing with land property from what he described in Europe and England and elsewhere. So can we say that Marx is relevant to the Chinese history and to the Chinese contemporary development?
Oh, very much, very much. And what it is today is that official status quo trying to interpret Marxism to their advantage. And so they want to control the dialogue. They want to steer away from that revolutionary analysis based on Marxism, dialectical materialism, and the revolutionary spirit of the Marxism. And so they trying to grab onto this thing saying, well, China is a backward country, it's not ready for socialism, not ready for communism, even though our aim is for that. That might be something a few thousand years from now. So they trying to take away the dialectics of the Marxism and using the theory, what they call a theory of productive forces, as if you don't have enough the productive forces, you cannot build socialism. So that's why they call it this. What they call? See, I always talk in Chinese, so I sometimes the phrase in English I forget. One is socialism with a Chinese character, and also is primary stage of socialism. All right, so justifying everything they do today, but people don't buy it, and also the fact is, Leninism built on Marxism. You cannot separate Lenin from Marx. You cannot separate Mao from Lenin. It's just like you like what Mao doing in this part, but the foundation's based on Marxism. And so the official status quo or official media is really very awkward, and they have to use Marxism to justify what they're doing, but the Marx writings are quite contrary. So, so they have to. What I describe is that they are very successful in distorting the Marxism. And imagine yourself, somebody has terrible bad breath and has the rotten mouth, and he chewed the gum and chew, there's no more flavor, and he put that gum into your mouth. That's how disgusting how the Marxism is being taught today. And the successful make people don't want that. And so by interpreting Marxism the way to suit their needs, a lot of young people hate it. But once they read the classics, they found, wait a minute, that's not what it is. And so people are rediscovering. They go back to classics.
China is not a peasant country anymore.
Oh,
So
no, far from it.
Should we see it as an emerging industrial capitalist superpower like those of the early 20th century, and generally, how hard for you is it to live between two cultures, two civilizations at a time when they are turning into rivals when the competition between the capitalist powers and conglomerates of powers is on the rise?
Yeah, of course. China is the #1 industrial country in the world. Maybe not, if Europe combined might have more than China. I'm not sure about that. But China produced the most industrial product in the world. And today we can see China with the new electrical vehicles flooding the European market. And I can see pretty soon European will start sanctioning Chinese auto import, and they can't take this. China becomes #1. Oh, many things become #1. Been a long time, #1 steel producers, #1 electrical power generation in the world. Today's #1 export of cars, surpassed Japan. Of course, with the population per capita might not be that high, but still, I mean, as far as industrial power, its ability to mobilize, to organize large-scale projects is unmatched. So that what you see today is that with this rising industrial power, it still must follow the logic of capitalism. The logic of capitalism is free competition lead to monopoly, monopoly lead to imperialism. There's no third way, and there's no other way to do it. Industrial capacity of China getting bigger and bigger. It needs more bigger market. It needs more resources. So it has to go around the world for energy, for raw materials and iron ores and all kinds of raw material. And also we need a ever bigger share of the world market. So the Belt and Road project, you can see one is to lead to Europe for market. Another one is lead to third world countries for resources. And so this expansion inevitably lead to conflict with the current superpower and the U.S. sphere of influence. China is carving away at the U.S. sphere of influence, not just in geopolitics, but also in technology, in industrial production. So you can see today in the Fortune 500, a few years ago, I looked at a Fortune 500, 20% of these Fortune 500 enterprises belongs to a single entity. That's Chinese state conglomerate. So they have the largest single monopoly capital in the world, single. However, U.S. still have Europe under its grip, Japan under its occupation. So U.S. still can organize, mobilize much bigger power than China, but it's just a matter of time before, I don't know what will happen. I mean, there's no win-win solution. In Chinese, there's a phrase that one mountain cannot sustain two tigers. So there will be a fight, see who dominates the world. So that's inevitable. And so basically, when I came to China in 2007, I went to this my university of National Business Economics, and all the professors are teaching about mutual benefits in international trade, and they don't have a clue about imperialism. And I was just amazed. And how can you teach about international trade without addressing the issue of imperialism?
There was a concept of mutual cooperation. I even remember the term chimerica, when China and America are so intertwined that they are inseparable. This was the dominating model in the 2000s. I remember talking to many experts, and they were confident that the contradictions are they exist, but they are not so relevant.
Well, but see, when China can produce sweatshop goods for the U.S., for the multinationals, toys and shoes and clothes and assembly iPhones, and the West are very happy. But China is not satisfied to be a sweatshop producer around the world, and they want to upgrade their technology, and they want to climb up the food chain, and they want to make their they know a product simple like a Nike shoes made in China, and China gets maybe $5 worth of for making shoes, and then U.S. sell for $100, and China says, I make the shoes, but how come you get the bigger line share? So they want to make their own shoes, and this is very natural. Everything they make for the Western, and they figure out, I need to do something my own so I can get that super profit. Why should the super profit only controlled by the U.S.? And so gradually they're moving up this food chain, and typical just Huawei cell phone, and threatens the U.S. domination in the world. And so U.S. have to sanction China, and because they find China in technology and industrial productions are carving away the U.S. sphere of influence. What
is it? What is it? Is it the logic of capitalist competition, or as some people are claiming here, because we have a rather wide range of China's admirers in Russia today, and China is often seen as a continuation of what the USSR could have been, a socialist country opposing the imperialist supercenter. So what are we seeing? What are we dealing now? Is it the logic of capitalism developing into imperialism, or is it the same old contradiction between the capitalist camp and the socialist camp? Because you mentioned the highest concentration of capital in some spheres of economy, but some may say that it is not just a capitalist concentration. Those companies in China are owned by the state. The state is controlled by the Communist Party, and that means it is all under the supervision of the working class.
No, that jumping logic is too far. No, there's no socialist camp today. We cannot. Depends on how you define socialism. In today's world, you will see so many ruling parties around the country have in their party's name socialists or workers and whatever. And we know the Labour Party in Britain is not for labor. I mean, if you buys the logic, if a party claimed to be socialist, it is a socialist. You're really naive.
That would mean that we're living in a socialist world already.
Right. And it's just ridiculous. We want to see socialism defined by Marxism, Leninism, is a society that's ruled by the working class. And you cannot just say, oh, this is the party of the working class, so the working class is in power. You need evidence. So many intellectuals in China claim that Mao's period working class was not in control, because their logic is that all the party leaders came not from working class. Well, based on that logic, the Labour Party in Britain is a working class party. They all came from labor movement, but so you cannot base on the background of the party's leaders or membership of the party. You have to base on what is the party striving for. And so I said, part of my study of the Cultural Revolution, it all of a sudden dawned on me, we have a best evidence that working class is firmly in control during Mao's period. What is the evidence? The factional fightings. And the factional fightings in a factory, mostly in factories or schools, the reason they can fight factional fighting is because they're the ruling class. You can think about Civil War. Civil War, in the history, Civil War either fought between two ruling class. For example, in the U.S., the Civil War in the U.S., you have northern industrialists, you have southern slave owners, and both are ruling class fighting over the future of the country. Or you can have a civil war like the Spanish Civil War. You have the ruling class fighting against the working class. Or in the Chinese Civil War before 49, you have the ruling class fighting the communists. So for a civil war, at least one side must be the ruling class. You cannot have two sides that are not working class, not the ruling class, and yet fight a civil war. And so, for example, the fight in Shanghai, the diesel factory, there were 3,000 some people, and they formed two factions. Both claimed to be rebel factions, but they were disagree on how to evaluate some of these old cadres in the factory. And this argument gets violent, and one faction actually violently kick out the other faction out of the factory. This is about 7,000. So a larger faction, almost 4,000 people. The smaller faction, 3,000 some more. And that's the reason they can't have that factional fighting, because the working class in control. I mean, imagine General Motor factory workers in the U.S., two factions fighting over the control of the factory. The ruling class use a machine gun, mow down the struggle. I mean, so who controls the power? Who controls the gun? Who has the right to speak up? So the factional fighting is what doomed the Cultural Revolution. That's one hand. But secondly, it proved the working class is in control.
Then we hear that this is inevitable because, again, it's the primary stage of socialism, and it needs some market elements, and the state has to protect its political course from all alleviations and distortions. And the Soviet Union had to do almost exactly the same in the 20s when we had our new economic policy, and that was needed to help the government of workers. And you obviously remember that the policy was initiated by Lenin. The government had to build the unexisting forces from scratch to initiate the creation of capital, so that later on capital could have been nationalized. So this is what we hear, and when we try to criticize the contradictions in the workers' movement in China today, the supporters of Chinese socialism in Russia are telling us that this is just a new economic policy, and you don't have to be concerned about it.
Well, new economic policy was implemented from 1949 to 56. And in those days, it's true, the state does not have enough capital, enough resources to build industrial base, especially during the anti-US war in Korea. In those days, the state helped these private enterprises to provide cotton, provide raw materials, make sure the factory can run, and but those are temporary. New economic policy is a temporary thing, and if you extend that to today, China is #1 industrial society. You're still claiming that's necessary. I don't know. You come from a different planet.
So if we are still in the age of imperialism described by Lenin, Does that mean that because the world of imperialism drifts towards the imperialist war?
Right.
Does that mean that the parallel with the early 20th century is also relevant?
Yeah, we are back to a pre-World War I situation, definitely. And only differences, there's quite a few differences between today and pre-World War I. First of all, before World War I, there were a lot of colonies, and there's no longer colonies. It's neocolonialism dominates rather than old colonialism. And secondly, we are in a nuclear age, so the superpowers cannot or highly unlikely to directly engage a nuclear war. And so instead, today, we are experiencing a race for armament, race in science technology, fight for sphere of influence, and proxy wars. And that is the nature of the Cold War, 50s till 80s. All right. So Cold War gave us how superpowers will compete. And the difference between Cold War 1.0 and today, I call it Cold War 2.0, is that during the first Cold War, there's hardly any economic ties between the Soviet bloc and the US bloc. And there's no hardly any economic, I mean, there's some, very few. They're isolated, insulated to camps. Today, that's no longer true. Today, two camps is highly integrated, highly dependent. So US talk about disengagement, but it's very hard, very hard. And so we are back to World War I situation in terms of superpower fighting for turfs. And also, so that's what's also difference is that World War I, World War II, all the fighting countries today no longer is superpower. Actually, all the European countries and Japan are occupied by US, military occupation. And so, so the World War I was not fought by superpowers, but just newly arriving imperialist powers. Today, we have superpowers fighting over domination in the world in terms of technology, in terms of their influence. So you can see it becomes something new compared to World War I. Very new. Yeah, so it's very much of uncharted territory. However, the basic set of contradictions are the same because capitalists, they have to expand or die. There's no third road. And every capitalist wants to be the top dog in the world. And so you cannot have, in one country, you can have anti-monopoly laws, for example, in the US. So you have Coca-Cola and you have Pepsi-Cola, and they're competing on service, they're advertising, not directly on price. Anti-monopoly laws preventing one firm take over another. However, internationally, there's no such thing as anti-monopoly laws. And the logic of imperialism is based on who has more, first, military power, political power, and economic power. So basically, what you see today is that the US camp and trying to prevent China gaining more influence in the world, and China trying to circumvent these blockades, and US hasn't, I mean, the blockade in China actually did a good service to China because when you can buy this technology, you have no incentive to make your own. But now when you cannot buy, they have all the incentive to do it their own. So US will not be able to stop Chinese progress in technology. And so there's no there's no win-win solution. So
that means that the clash is inevitable.
Yeah,
collision.
yeah.
And what would that mean for humanity and for the working class and for the Chinese working class in particular?
Well, I don't know what Lenin said or not, but Mao said either revolution prevent the war, or the war will lead to revolution. We, in today a nuclear age, humanity is faced a choice: either communism, that's the only way out, or barbarism, and just the nuclear weapon of all the countries can wipe out the humanity, the majority of the people. And so how that will happen, I don't know. That's for the working class to understand. And based on the history in the U.S., I was there, and how people in the U.S. Start fighting against the draft in the war, the Vietnamese War, and so more and more people against the war, eventually made the U.S. find it's not worthwhile to continue the war in Vietnam. It's not because U.S. don't have more advanced weaponry, but rather the soldiers lost his will to fight because they find out that's not a just war. If you have unjust war, a proxy war or whatever kind of war, the working class going to bear the most sacrifice. A sacrifice not in terms of economically, but dead bodies. That's what drove American people into the movement against the war. So the working class need to know this rivalry between the imperialist powers is not for their good. So they need to turn this imperialist war into a civil war to overthrow the capitalism. How that happened, I don't know.
Should we see the current military conflicts expanding in Europe and the Middle East, emerging in other parts of the world? Should we see them as a preliminary stage of this major new conflagration? The world imperialist war.
Well, there's part of that, but right now, all these conflicts is not between U.S. and China, not yet. Although China want to make sure their interests being protected in Europe and Middle East, so they're actively engaging. But generally today, U.S. actually militarily are more worried about Russia's military than Chinese military, because Russians still have a huge stockpile of nuclear weapons and armaments. And so I think this current war in Ukraine was I don't know how popular or unpopular that war is in Russia, but from my perspective, it was a trap that U.S. set for Russia, and Russian falling for it. And before the Ukraine war, politicians, diplomats in the U.S. are talking about the danger of forcing Russia and China alliances, and you cannot fight two together. That will be devastating. But now Russia is stuck in this war in Ukraine. That frees the U.S. to large degrees, because now U.S. can focus on containing China and free its hand to deal with China without too much worry about Russian joining forces with China anywhere else. So U.S., from what I can see, it is for the best interest to prolong this war as long as possible. So they will not provide sufficient military to Ukraine to defeat Russia, but also they will provide enough so Ukraine can keep on fighting. This way that Russia get into this quagmire, can't get out. That's for the best interest for the U.S. And that's not good for Russia, not good for China. Not quite. Actually, China benefit a little bit from this. This Ukraine war, China benefit from many ways. That Russian used to have a high guard against Chinese influence, but now many trade and also Chinese train go to Europe and go through all these former Soviet Union countries and become a lot easier. So a lot of Chinese nationalists and see this Ukraine war after 2 years, seeing actually benefit China to large degrees. But beginning the Ukraine war, a lot of people support the Russian side and feel that the alliance between China and Russia is very important to fight against U.S. imperialism. But today, I find not too many people push that view anymore.
You mentioned Chinese nationalists. Does such thing as nationalism exist in a socialist society? If we're dealing with the national capital, there should be nationalism. How does it look like if it is there? And
unless you define socialism as state intervention of national economy, and by that definition, I don't know, majority or a very large chunk of the people, countries in the world can be labeled as socialist, and many countries claim they are socialist. But we are talking about socialism in a Marxian sense, in the Lenin sense. So today, nationalism is no longer a progressive force in China. Today, they are imperial nationalists.
They exist.
They
exist.
That is the main form of nationalism. Is like a U.S. jingoism, just like.
And who are they? Is it just isolated experts, bloggers, popular pundits? Who are the people promoting such views?
Well, it's best interest for the regime, and they push this. They propagate this, not overtly, but it's quite overtly, and the rise of China and restore the glory of China, just like Trump says, make America great again. So these imperialist nationalists says make China great again. And they want to go back to ancient China being a huge imperial power. And you can see that in social media, very strong. Even today, for example, Burma. I don't know whether you follow the Burma situation.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So, the commentary is overwhelming, talking about, oh, that's so good for us. So that us is imperial nationalism. It's not about working class.
Sometimes, as we know from history, most of the time, the rise of nationalism is followed by the promotion of religion. You once mentioned that Confucianism isn't capable to offer solutions to the world of this age of imperialist age. At the same time, this is the ideology that has become on par with Marxism in the modern Chinese society. What could you say about that?
Because the ruling elite need some kind of a justification for their rule, and they need some kind of consensus in the country, and Marxism does not provide them. They only use Marxism as far as legitimize their rule, but they cannot go too deep in Marxism, otherwise they will negate themselves. So what they do, they call in nationalism, And what do you do in nationalism? You call back Confucianism. And but that is actually, I think that people laugh at it. Yeah, just like because that's so futile and so rotten. And there are people who very much into that. The government's promoting that around the world, but it has not been very successful. And because I think every ruling class has to promote its interests based on its own history. So in Europe, religion is a powerful force in history. So fascism come out using the religious clothing. That is understandable, but religion doesn't have much influence in Chinese history because emperor doesn't want religion to challenge his own rule. So Confucianism is more like a philosophy rather than a religion. And so Chinese ruling class cannot really use too much of religion as a tool for its control. So I don't see Confucianism make a big dent in the future.
How hard is it to keep such views and to be a popular blogger and a popular teacher in such an environment?
Talking about me?
Yes. Could it lead to some complications for?
Yeah, of course. Well, part is because I don't have much expectation. I came back in 2007 with very low expectation. I just want to find out what happened, why it happened. I was satisfied with my own understanding. And so occasionally I share my views and find out there's so many people find fascinating. And that was totally surprising to me. And so I starting talking about my parents, my own history, contrasting my experience working in China 5 years and my more than a dozen years working in the US as steel worker, auto worker, all kinds of jobs. And people find fascinating. And so more than 10 years ago, I think 2010, I gave a talk in a library in Guangzhou. And that talk been spreading on the internet, on the social media, over 1 million people watching it, commenting it. And so people taking snippets and then reprocess it and just find very supportive. And so finally, about a year and a half ago, my friends encouraged me to start a blogging myself. As I reluctant. And finally I just start doing it and share my views. Didn't expect people to agree or disagree. I'm not in the argument mood, and I just feel like a law of physics. There's no argument. You have experiments. You have results. There's no arguments, and once you understand the law of the capitalism, law of class struggle, you present this as a inevitable thing, and some people agree, some people disagree, and then of course, as more people follow my blog or my platform, I get attacked, all kinds of attacks. At the beginning, it was hard, yeah, because I'm a little bit shy, hard to imagine, but I don't like to be attacked. And but finally you get used to it. I realized if you want to say anything, there will be some people cursing you, attacking you. That's inevitable, unless you don't speak up. And so I have many things I talked about, sharing my views. I get attacked. I was vehemently against this anti-Black racism, and I get so many attacks. But that doesn't bother me. Just shows you guys are ridiculous. You don't know what you're talking about. I've experienced 30 years in the US, understand what racism is about. And I just thought, what are you guys talking about? The Black people, identical things they said 100 years ago about Chinese in the U.S. How can you not see this? All right. So my views on anti-racism get a lot of flack, but a lot of other people understand. And then my views about Ukraine war, I got a lot of flack. And then more and more people can see my point of view. And my view on women's equality, I get all kinds of attacks. And my view about COVID policy, people attack me. But then later on, you find that's attackers not really whatever. I mean, more people supporting what my view is. So, I mean, over the year, few months, a year, I gained more confidence. And for tell the truth, I was surprised how many people interested. And these days I go on subway, almost every time somebody said, "Are you Yang Heping?" My Chinese name. "Are you FedEx?" I said, "Yeah." "I've been following you back all these time. I mean, you're doing so great." And last night I come back from my friend's place, and just my subway before I got off, and the guy stopped me. "I want to take a picture with you." And then he got his son take a picture with me, and that guy his wife taking a picture with me. And then it says, "You know, at beginning when you're talking about rising imperialist power, I thought you just because you're American and so you have a bias. But now I think you're right. You're right. I mean, we are becoming imperialist power." And so, you know, I mean, I get encouragement, I get support from all places. Of course, I'm also have to practice self-censorship, and you don't want the power to be got angry with you. So you got to careful what you say. So beginning, God, everything I post got blocked, and you got to figure out how to say it differently. So finally, I just gave up using blogging, using video. Video is a lot less censorship, but there are things that you cannot say. And a few months ago, when the Paris youth riot against the Paris police for the violence suppressing young people, I made a comment. I says, "Well, revolution will not be televised." That's a song during the Vietnam War in the U.S. And I just saying, "So, well, this is, I mean, what do you think of revolution? Is this all dinner party? I mean, this is what it is." And less than 2 days, I got almost 300,000 viewings and over 66,000 comments, and they're heated debate about this. And then some people complained to the website that I post this stuff, and the website didn't pay attention because this is talking about Paris, not talking about China. And any controversy can draw people's opinion, draw people to the web, and they make profit from this. So they're all into it. This is great. And then some people said, "Well, if the platform, the Bilibili website don't block this, they call the national police." And then my school called me. "I heard you have this video. Can you take that down? Can you take care of this?" So I have to delete it.
I see. Very, very familiar situation in our part of the socialist world here. So thank you so much, Fred. It was so interesting to listen to you. Such an inspiring story. So much to talk about. I wish you be able to follow the feedback in the Russian social media, because I'm sure that it's going to be discussed. But getting back to the beginning, to your family's story, one of the interviews, the late interviews your mom gave to American media, she mentioned that they watched the socialist dream fall apart. And she said that she also saw the socialist cause betrayed. Have you talked about that? Did you have a chance to discuss what happened to the dreams and beliefs of that generation?
We talk a lot. In fact, in the 80s, I bought into the reform logic and I had heated arguments with my parents. Heated arguments. We love to argue. I mean, in my family, we have the tradition. We just argue about philosophy, about society, and cultural evolution. Obviously, there's a lot of things to argue about it. And so in the 90s, I getting more and more agree with my parents' view. And so, of course, they have a lot of influence on me, but I think more than them is the reality in the society. The imperialist wars and the workers being laid off and the working class no longer being the master in society. All these hard facts make you have to think. And so my parents were very, what's the word? They're not disillusioned, but they are very sad that the revolution is gone. And they saw capitalism very early. I compare, like I stayed in the US for 30 years, so I can smell imperialism a mile away. And a lot of people in China don't see imperialism until lately. And my parents stayed all their life, first their life in the US, so they understand very well the logic of capitalism. So when the reform comes in and all the logic talk about, that's something they saw already. And so you can't fool them. And but my parents, if I have any criticism, sometimes they're not good at explaining why. And for example, when my father just made an example, he says, you cannot have socialism and capitalism you cannot be partial pregnant. So for example, you cannot have cars go on the right lane, trucks go on the left lane. You're going to have collision. These metaphors make me think, however, they don't explain in concrete why we cannot have both. And it's only through all these years of observing reality, understand the logic, capitalism, and finally I agree with my parents.